Okay, so thank you for joining us on this episode. It's another episode where we're going to be discussing recruitment today. And I don't want to take so much of your time. So we're going to just jump into the introductions. And I'll start off with my left-hand side. We're going to go around. So over to you, Richard.
I'm Richard Levine. I've been working in the recruitment space for about 11 years now. Joined as somebody who was on the hiring side and then was introduced to the area of recruitment and been with the same company. So my specialization has been recruiting in the finance and accounting space for a large global recruiting organization.
Thank you. I guess we'll go to Mahalia now.
Okay, hi, my name is Mahalia Critchlow, and I've been working in recruitment for the last 9 years. I recently founded my own staffing agency, so I'm the founder and principal recruiter of Alium Staffing Solutions, and I specialize in permanent placements.
Very good, thank you. We'll move over to Brandy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandy Ryan. I work in recruiting as a senior recruitment advisor. I've been in professional services for the past 15 years, working in large corporations on Bay Street. And so I've also got a large portion of my role in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and do a lot of initiatives for hiring in that space as well.
Very good, thank you. And my name is Kevin, and I'm a management consultant in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I work with both private and public sectors, and we work with our clients to create opportunities for inclusive participation for everyone. And to that end, we find ourselves here again. We're going to be talking about recruitment today, and I'm joined by all these great professionals within recruitment. And I can't wait to hear what we're going to be discussing today. So without further ado, we're just going to jump into the first question I sent on the agenda, and I'd want to hear your thoughts. And perhaps I'll take it back to Richard. So what are some of the challenges you face in your journey as a Black professional in recruitment?
I mean, there's perhaps a lot of ways I can tackle that, but I guess probably as a recruiter, I think probably the biggest challenge that I find, or where I find the biggest kind of threat to our community, is more in terms of the candidate space. And I probably don't look at myself as too often in terms of a lot of self-reflection in terms of how it holds me back, although I know that there are, there's biases and prejudices that are out there. I mean, I can, see the faces of those that are in positions of authority in the recruiting space, outside of those that own their own private organizations. And, there's an image there that tends to be kind of singular in terms of, the demographics. And so that is something that's constantly being maybe challenged or on the flip side of it, reinforced. But I guess with always having kind of that candidate focus, I recognize that it's so important for recruiters of color to be out there because, they do look at other individuals of color differently and hold them at a more equitable standard than maybe, your white colleagues may. So, it's twofold in that space. So that's why it's very important to have people of color in the recruiting field. If that answers your question.
Yeah, more or less, it does. I guess we're going to be able to explore further as we go down this path in these questions. Mahalia, your thoughts?
Well, some of the challenges I faced in recruitment, very much like Richard, I'd say the candidate piece. So representing and advocating for your candidates, ensuring that when an offer comes through, it meets their expectations, and sometimes having to negotiate a bit more when it comes to compensation. I found that to be quite a challenge. Another thing that I feel has been, an uphill climb has been alliances and partnership. So once you're securing an engagement, making sure that that relationship is solid, and it takes a lot of rapport building, and sometimes it's difficult to build rapport with decision makers who may not view you as a business partner that they otherwise would have sought out. So that's something that has really pushed me out of my comfort zone, just continuing to push those relationships forward and prove myself and my credibility on a regular basis.
Very good. I do want to hear your thoughts, Brandy.
Yeah, you know, there's definitely been some challenges over the years, but I would say, you know, echoing what both Richard and Mahalia have said is representation for sure. I think that a lot of candidates who come from diverse groups or, you know, marginalized groups, they want to see representation within the firm in terms of recruiting. So, you know, making sure that, you know, your organization has recruiters, people of color, you know, people who are part of these, you know, inclusive groups, because, you know, we have the lens to be able to see things, you know, in a different way, and to be able to relate to and have a rapport with candidates in a different way. And I think that that representation is really important. If you do have any initiatives that are targeting, you know, people of color, you want to do D&I initiatives in terms of recruiting, you have to make sure that you have that representation. And also too, I think that, you know, it's the candidates may not even think that this is a firm for me if they don't see people that look like them and they are not interacting with people from their communities. They will feel like you are just talking the talk and you're not walking the walk. And, you know, you have to have that buy-in, and you have to have that support from, you know, the decision makers and the people from the top, to make sure that, you know, if you do have initiatives that are targeting improving your numbers and your stats on D&I recruiting, that you have that buy-in, you have that support. And if there are any like little committees or groups and stuff like that, I know I've been a part of many of them over the years. I've been doing D&I work for the past 9 years, you know, before it's become in the forefront. And that's why I've been involved in it for so many years, because there's been a need for it. And yet there's a lot of times where I've been on certain committees or, you know, groups where we don't even have representation within that group or committee. So you have to make sure that you have people at the table who can understand and relate, who have that inclusive lens, who can help move forward in the best way possible for these communities that we want to include. And so those are, I think, some of the challenges that I've seen, you know, at many different firms out there that I've had interaction with.
I can maybe pick up on something
Yeah, sure.
you said that I think was very important and profound, is the area of recruitment. People kind of put us in an HR category, but we are salespeople. I mean, we have to get the job opportunities first and foremost before we can actually put the candidates in those roles. And so, you know, she touched on the fact that that relationship building, it can have kind of an extra layer of challenge for a Black recruiter that's in that space, because generally hiring managers, you know, at the end of the day, most importantly is that they want to have somebody that they have built up some rapport with, that they feel that they can be very candid with, that they can reveal areas or issues within their hiring profile that they may not want to necessarily disclose openly and generically. And so they will tend to be more comfortable oftentimes, I mean, I'm talking in generalities here, but oftentimes more comfortable with people that they feel that they have an affinity with, right? And then that also has implications to their hiring profile, which they may feel a little bit more comfortable in being able to disclose to somebody who may be, if they're white, then they may be more comfortable in disclosing if they're white. And so, you know, that's a very important point that I wanted to underscore that Mahalia touched on, which makes the area of recruitment, I think, different. It's got a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more challenging, I think, for your Black recruiters. I don't know if you guys would agree with me on that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I actually really want to unpack that. I want to try and understand, okay, so from a recruiter's perspective, you all recognize how important it is to have representation. But do you find that, and maybe I can maybe tie this into the second question, and maybe we'll start with Richard. I'm finding that that message is perhaps not really getting across to the decision makers. And how do we make that message resonate with the decision makers? And I'm going to jump into the second point here, so at least we can tie that in. Based on your experience, what are the top 3 barriers that are unique to Black professionals in recruitment? And I think you touched on one of them, being, having that personal relationship with the people that you're recruiting to begin with, and what are some of the solutions to some of these barriers? And I'll take this back to Richard.
Well, again, I think one of the biggest challenges is at first in building the rapport with your customers, those companies that are out there. That has its challenges. I mean, I think in terms of recruitment, as far as the company that I work for, and I think it's probably not necessarily unique to that company, but many of the companies that we recruit for are small to medium-sized businesses. Many of the larger organizations have their own recruitment teams. They have more detailed policies around equity and inclusion, and these are things that they're a little bit more concerned about, and maybe less so on the fit as it pertains to blending into the current environment. They're a little bit more open to looking at diversity as a strength as opposed to it being a threat. And I think a smaller organization generally and oftentimes looks at diversity as a threat to culture. And so, that's the biggest hurdle in being able to get over. How you would get over that, I find it's difficult. I think, from an objective standpoint, I think people might say, well, if diversity can be shown to be good for the bottom line, then you would expect that a company would want to ensure that there's diversity on their workforce. But I think sometimes people don't recognize that companies are not always necessarily doing everything that's in the best interest of their bottom line. And they are sometimes doing what they feel they're comfortable in doing. And so that's why you will sometimes find hiring managers will even hire an individual that is maybe far less qualified even for somebody else, because they've met somebody who they really like. Yeah. And so they will hire that individual. So, the client relationship is extremely important. The dynamics of the candidate relationship are a little bit different because they're oftentimes looking for you to help them. So there's a little bit more of maybe a respect that's given. But, as a person of color, you also take that trust that they're giving you differently. You put a higher premium on it, and you realize that you are not just finding them a job, but you're finding them a job because you realize also that they have greater challenges out there in the marketplace. So you put a little bit more of that responsibility on you. And I guess, how do you handle that? Well, you just give them a little bit more opportunity, a little bit more of a chance. You have to sometimes sell them a little bit more effectively and harder into an opportunity, perhaps, to give them that face time with a hiring manager so that they can get a shot. So maybe that's 2 of the greater challenges. I guess probably the third one, if I had to pick one, would just be the challenge of trying to support the other recruiters of color that are within your organization. That can be very difficult and challenging. I mean, we are in a very competitive world, but we do, and it's important to recognize that, that they have challenges and they have hurdles, and you have to be able to reach out and extend a hand and work cooperatively with your people, essentially, because you realize that they have the same challenges that you do, and you need to stick by each other in order to kind of make each other successful.
Thank you. I'd want to explore that. I think you mentioned the fact that some organizations find that or feel that introducing, or rather, look at diversity as a threat, as opposed to a something that they can celebrate, or Do you find that this is perhaps the thoughts that, the thought that, it could be a disruption to them, to their everyday services, or how they service their clients, or how they interact with their clients? I'd want to really understand that. How would the companies be looking at this as a threat?
You want me to complete that thought? Okay. Well, I think it's important to realize that companies, you might have a company that has a particular culture or mission or ethos in terms of how they operate, but that doesn't mean that all of the rank and file and those that are in positions of hiring authority are looking necessarily at the best interests of the bottom line. I'll give you an example, a very simple one. I remember many years ago, my wife had applied for a position, and or she worked at a company rather, and one of the hiring managers, who was quite high up in the organization, one of his questions that he would ask his managers as they were hiring people was, does the person being hired get the joke? So that is a kind of and there wasn't any particular joke, it was a way of being able to say, do they fit in with the way that we operate? Will they conform? Will they maybe maybe there's off-color humor? Will they run to HR? Will they be able to meld, blend in and meld to the way that we do things? Because if they don't get the joke, then they are going to be a threat to, the kind of the group dynamics or the hegemony of the organization or that particular department. And that's an example of kind of how many organizations or many departments or cultures or subcultures within an organization operate. So not necessarily always looking for the best talent or experience or resume, but putting a very big premium on the person that gets the joke, if you understand what I mean.
I agree. And it's funny because in equity, diversity, inclusion, we're trying to make sure that clients or rather organizations can recognize that the strength is actually in discovering that it is essential to infiltrate your internal culture by introducing that diversity and recognizing that that is a bias in itself. And if you're able to normalize that it's okay to introduce different cultures within your environment, if anything, you're actually gaining, you're not losing, and it's no longer a threat. I think we've gone to a point where we are so accustomed to normalizing work culture. And so a majority of us, and especially Black professionals, end up checking their culture at the door and in such a way that, you go into this organization and you've got to conform, but, someone else is telling you, no, it's okay to be you. But, there's a big hand telling you, no, conform. And so it's funny how, people end up doing the code switch, as we call it, on an ongoing basis to ensure that they can conform to that organizational culture that may not necessarily be allowing them to, to be their best selves, right? And if you really want to maximize your potential, then you can only do that when you're authentic. Keep in mind, a lot of these work cultures are driven by the dominant group. In this case, a majority of them, most organizations are run by white colleagues. And so it may not necessarily fit with your personal culture or whatever you're checking at the door. And they're able to maximize their best self. And we're not. And so I think it is important that people understand that it's okay to be your authentic self. It doesn't matter where it is you're from. It's very okay. And so, but you bring up a really good point, and I think that is something that we see right across most organizations, where when you're bringing a candidate in, you're trying to determine, are they going to be a fit? And what I've been challenging, especially folks within recruiting, is can we perhaps start thinking about how is that candidate strategically addressing the client's needs? In this case, the client to the organization. So if it could be your customers or the clients that you serve. So if I'm bringing in a candidate, can we perhaps start considering, as opposed to being a best fit for that organization, how are they addressing that organization's clients' needs, right? And then that could perhaps elevate or enhance that conversation within, right? I'd want to hear your thoughts, Mahalia, as well.
So I think Richard's touched on a lot of the barriers, and me personally, one of the things that was very much at the forefront of my mind every day was my personal brand, like how I was coming across to my colleagues, business partners, and client groups as well. And I found myself policing my conduct on a regular basis and making sure that I was crossing all my T's, dotting my I's, very, very focused on getting things right the first time. And that can lead to a lot of nerves, right? So you're not always feeling 100% comfortable at work. Another barrier that I faced was securing leadership engagements. Like when I started in recruitment, I was doing mostly administrative placements, and the conversations were easier in terms of advocating for my candidates. When I moved into more finance-focused roles, there was a ceiling in terms of the roles that I could work on. It wasn't often that I was tapped on the shoulder for an engagement that was a leadership position in finance. And I had an awareness as to why that was happening. But I think it's important to push through and get yourself in those doors and not give up. And there are candidates out there that are 100% being presented based on merit. And that was something that I was very firm on. So presenting my candidates based on merit. Something else that was a part of my professional experience was just being excluded from partnership with my colleagues. Like a lot of times I would hear conversations, because in an agency setting, it's decorum only goes so far. It's like the Wild West, I would describe it as, right? So the conversations can be pretty frank. And I've had colleagues say, I know that the fit here is a white woman, for example, right? Or this client has boldly said, like, this is what our workforce looks like. This is who we want to hire. So that can be very demoralizing, right? When you're being told outright that that's the case. The solutions to these barriers, I think, I don't want to say will come with time. I think now is the time to speak up and educate as much as possible on the merit, the benefits of a diverse workforce. And it's our responsibility to stay committed to that as a mandate, as recruitment professionals of color.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. That's interesting. I've never actually come across that a client, in this case, if you're recruiting for a firm or for an organization, they'll tell you that this is what we look like and this is what we want you to hire. That happens?
That has happened to me personally. Wow. Yes.
That's very, but I think you touch on a really good point, because I think when we started this conversation, Richard mentioned that within larger organizations, which I used to be part of, yeah, you're right. You go out there tapping diversity as a strength, and that type of conversation never used to happen. We had a recruiting team. We had a talent development team within the organization, and as much as I was never part of the recruitment team, I mean, I did interact with them, and we worked with them to hire candidates and to bring in leaders. Those conversations just never came up. It could have been just maybe never apparent to me. Sometimes you may just not hear something at certain levels. And plus, I'm largely aware, especially if you're in a position of leadership like I was, a lot of the information will be cleaned out before it gets to your desk. So I'm aware of that. And then I know that happens. So the way I counter that is by just paying close attention and keeping my ears to the front line, and interact with those people that actually do the work, and getting a sense of actually what is really going on, as opposed to depending on your direct reports to tell you exactly what's going on. That's very interesting. I've never come across that, but that's good to hear, man. It's eye-opening.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of uh, the silver lining of working in an agency setting is that the gloves are off, right? When a client's coming to you and they have a need, and because they're paying you, I think that they're a bit more free with their speech in terms of expressing like, this is what I'm looking for. And how you challenge that, I myself have learned to be very careful in pushing back in terms of who I present and why. But it's something that has been expressed plainly to me.
That It's very interesting. Oh wow.
Same
I'd
here.
want to unpack that. Brandy, I'd want to hear your thoughts as well. Let me hear what you've faced in terms of some of the unique experiences you've had, especially within recruitment, and possible solutions that you may have had to address as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think all of us in recruitment, it sounds like we've all had a lot of similar experiences. And with what Mahalia just said, you know, in terms of clients being more free to speak their minds, you know, in her situation, because, you know, usually agency fees are pretty high and they feel like, you know, they need to be able to speak their mind to get exactly what they want. Whereas in my world, those things are a lot more subtle or not said or implied, and you have to read between the lines or, you know, understand kind of what these challenges are. And I think that, you know, it can be challenging for us as recruiters in our space in so many ways, and that because we have that inclusive lens, we can kind of in, you know, get a sense of what they are not saying and what they might be hesitant about, and how do we push back and make sure that, you know, all of the candidates are equally you know, considered, and that they each have an equal opportunity to go for this role, and that it's not one of those situations where we're just hiring the same person over and over, and, you know, like what Richard said, like the right fit, quote unquote, you know, someone who's just going to immediately gel with the team because, you know, that person is exactly like everybody else on the team with the same background and all of that. You know, we do have to combat a lot of that, especially in professional services or certain schools and things like that, that people like to hire from. So when we push it back, like Mahalia said, we have to figure out how to do it strategically and how to do it, you know, I don't want to say gently, because just like she said, we have to kind of check ourselves and we have to be careful, because it can be seen when we're advocating for certain candidates. You know, I've had situations where I've thought the candidate was amazing, like we have to hire this person, they're fantastic, but I've had to fight for them because there's, you know, an unconscious bias that maybe even the hiring manager is not even aware that they have this unconscious bias, but there's just some reason why, oh, let's just see some more resumes. Well, why not? This candidate's really good. Let's talk about why, right? And how to push back and make sure that you are advocating for people who need that shot and need to be in front of these people, and, you know, are shouldn't be dismissed for no particular reason. But we do have the added barrier as being Black recruiters that we feel sometimes a little bit of apprehension when we're advocating for other candidates of color, because we can be seen as, well, why are you why are you showing favoritism to these candidates? There's some reason why you want to be pushing these candidates. So we have to kind of walk that tightrope, that balance between advocating and making sure, listen, our people of color need to have a chance here equally, without being pushy and making it seem like it's a certain agenda, and also making sure that, you know, any unconscious biases are being addressed. And then there's that also that added pressure when you do advocate for candidates, that you of course now feel responsible for them to perform, because you know, I went out on a limb for this person and I pushed for them to get this job, and then of course you feel like hopefully there's no reflection, you know, on you because you pushed and you were like, yeah, make sure you hire. So there's all these little added things going on in the back of our minds that we have to deal with, that I can guarantee you my other counterparts do not even have to think twice about when they are pushing for candidates and hiring people and getting people through the system. We have to think about all of that extra stuff, and we have to kind of navigate almost like this minefield of like how much is too much and how much is not enough, and making sure that, you know, if you have a D&I agenda like I do, making sure, me personally, this is something that's important to me. I want to make sure that I'm that person that is going to fight for people who didn't get a chance, but also not becoming that person in other people's eyes, right? So I think that that's a huge challenge that we have, that there's just so many other things that we have to deal with as Black people in the workplace in general, and then on top of that in the recruitment space. And so I would also say that kind of ties into my next point, which is another challenge is we have to push beyond our role sometimes, a lot of the times. Like I was mentioning, I've been doing D&I work for like the past 9 years. So when I started, it was like all side of desk, like it was all my initiative. It was all like, this is important, we need to make some changes here, and taking my own personal time, making sure every single event I was going to that, I was making sure I was representing, I was meeting people, I was, you know, getting people in the mix, connecting the right people, giving people a shot. And that is not all necessarily my job or in my job description, but because I see there's a gap there and I see that I know I can make a difference, I have to sometimes, you know, do all of these things on my own or outside of my job, and, you know, go beyond my role, so that some of these, you know, to kind of equal the playing field, right? And so I think that's a challenge too, is that, you know, we can't always be all things, but we do have to try our best to stay true to ourselves and what's important to us and where we know we can make a difference. And I've seen that, you know, if I do these things, I make a difference. Of course, there's times where I'm like, listen, I've had 3 panels this week. Like, I'm tired, you know, I have things going on, I have a personal life. But at the same time, if we don't share our experiences together, support each other as people in the same community, network with each other to make sure that, you know, we are all connected, you know, it's all a part of it, right? So I would say, you know, that sort of side of desk stuff is like another challenge. And then I think the last one I would say is, and it's a pretty big one, and it's always a challenge, I think, is getting a seat at the table with the decision makers. So, you know, it's all well and good that we are recruiters who care about D&I, and we want to make sure we get, you know, people a chance and all that, but we should strive to move beyond just these roles and maybe be in more positions of advanced leadership when it comes to recruitment or HR in general, or within, you know, maybe a people and culture office, or maybe even a, you know, diversity and inclusion group or something like that. We need to make sure that we can advance into those positions so that we can be more of the decision makers, because at the end of the day, if we are not part of who's making the decisions that we need to do this, hopefully this push on D&I that's happening right now is not something that's just going to die down because people were upset about George Floyd and they got excited and said, okay, we're going to do this. And then, you know, in a couple of months, they're not really going to be invested anymore. Like, we need to make sure that the momentum that we've built, and, you know, unfortunately from the tragedy that happened, that good can come out of it, and we keep this agenda going. And if we don't have people in positions of power to make these decisions and to make sure it stays on the table of the agenda, and to make sure, you know, it's top of mind for these firms, we might not see as much support for these programs.
Very good. There are a few things that I want to unpack out of that, but I'll probably tie into the third question. So what are your thoughts on the roles perhaps some of the following institutions will play in addressing barriers faced by Black professionals in recruitment? And perhaps I can start with professional associations. In this case, maybe we can consider the HRPA, and maybe the second group that want us to consider institution would be organizations, recruiting firms, and post-secondary institutions. I'll take this back to Richard, please.
I'm sorry, I kind of missed the first part of the question. Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so what are your thoughts on what the following, on the roles the following institutions should play in addressing barriers faced by Black professionals in recruitment? And the first institution we can explore would be professional associations. And that would be, in this case, in the realm of maybe HR or whatever professional association you may be affiliated with. The second would be organization, third, recruitment firms, and lastly, post-secondary institutions.
Well, I think all of these.
All of them, we can go through some of them.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm affiliated with several institutions. My area of specialization on the recruiting side is finance and accounting. So, you know, there's a number of institutions that specialize in that area. And I think that they've all, as many other associations and institutions have started to look at equity and inclusion as something that is important to them. Personally, I haven't seen a lot of initiatives or, you know, kind of action on that front in terms of reach, you know, kind of outreach. Maybe if I specifically went and looked or targeted them, then maybe there's something that might be happening, but not that I'm seeing that's overtly done. Or, you know, I'm fairly regularly, you know, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm not seeing much as far as association changes or activity that's happening there. Not seeing it from the schools either. And obviously you're talking about, like, you know, the universities and colleges that are out there. You'll have maybe certain programs that might be a little bit more, you know, modern in their approach, maybe on the IT space, for example, but kind of as a general or kind of wider community within the college universities, I'm just not seeing it or experiencing it. I'm not saying that it's not happening, but I'm not seeing a lot of activity or action that's happening there. And clearly those organizations have generally been led by, you know, by white folks. And so I think in many ways they're also challenged on what they are to do and what they ought to do. And maybe, you know, that's not giving any excuse, but I think that also might be a reflection of why you're not seeing a lot of things happening out of many of these institutions from my perspective. Maybe your other guests might see things differently.
Thanks, Richard. Mahila, your thoughts?
I think for professional associations, what could be a good first step is just examining, you know, their conduct, things like where they're holding their AGMs, membership fees and dues, how frequently they're meeting, where they're meeting, you know, and asking themselves the question, what can we do to see more diversity within our organizations? I think that would be a good first step. In terms of post-secondary institutions, I can say from personal experience, I know that a few universities are now beginning to actively seek out BIPOC-owned agencies for assistance with hiring, which is incredible to me. You know, that's a mandate. And then I've also heard of private corporations agreeing to the Black North Initiative, which by 2025, they've put in, you know, some internal checks and balances and audit points so that they can at least say, you know, we've checked off this box for X amount of people of color in terms of candidates, and we've checked off this box in terms of external relationships and vendors and that type of thing. So, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's definitely a step in the right direction as we look to create a more inclusive work environment. And I really think that Gen Z is pushing the envelope because they identify as post-racial, right? So there's a lot of things that are important to them. Like, work is not just a place where you collect a check. They identify with their workplace, and they want to identify with organizations that have a mission and mandate for D&I. So I think using that as a point of competition now, like if you want to be seen as a company that is attracting top talent, what are you doing to include more professionals? And because it's being demanded from the workforce and, you know, the job market, essentially, I think that's what's going to, you know, move the needle. Not necessarily that these organizations are going to have an epiphany, but as they realize, hey, we're not attracting the people that we need. Our bottom line is now effective because we don't have top talent. What can we do differently? I think when it hits their pockets, that's when things start to change. And fortunately, the more up and comer profiles, they're doing in my personal opinion, just by their beliefs, are doing a lot to influence companies to look at themselves?
Thanks. You brought up some really good points, and you're right about that, especially with the Gen Z and how they look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's very essential for them to have that in mind at any organization for them to really thrive, right? And they're demanding it. And so, but I think that the problem with that and the trouble with that is that there's a huge gap between who's in charge of the workplace and who's actually working at the workplace. And so the idea here is to make sure that we can get a lot more of them, maybe in leadership, and for the most part, is trying to make sure that we can get leaders to really understand what diversity is all about or what equity is all about. And I think to Richard's point, I think you'd mentioned that you're not seeing enough. And in my view, I'm very careful when I see a statement or a press release by any company, because I know, be the perception that you're diverse or equitable is pays off. It's financially rewarding. So I'm careful to really understand exactly what do you mean by saying that you're diverse. And so it's very important. I think we start paying attention to the face value of what we're saying or we're hearing, because it's not necessarily as it's portrayed, because every company has its own interest when they're putting out a statement or press release. And so I think it's incumbent on everyone that's digesting that message to really understand, okay, if a company is saying, or if an organization is saying, okay, we plan on doing A, B, and C, what's the intention? Whose interest is that statement serving? Is it actually the people that work for you? Is it your employees, or is it public opinion, public perceptions, which is really good for your bottom line? So I'm careful about that. And I think Haley brought up a good point, especially with universities. They're going through the same trouble as well, as trying to go through this journey and discovering themselves and understanding exactly where they've gone wrong and how they can actually bridge that gap. I do find many organizations, especially most ton of universities out there, that are still struggling with it in terms of identifying where they are in this and understanding exactly what equity, diversity, and inclusion is all about. And I think it's going to be a while before we can get anyone to cross that bridge. I'd want to hear your thoughts, Brandy.
I think that, you've assembled some great panelists here, because I agree again with both Haley and Richard. And I would agree with Mahelia's comments in the fact that a lot of these organizations that we do need to connect with, they do make a difference, and it's important. And for me, especially, like, I've noticed that there's value that some of these organizations can bring to collaborating with us, in the sense that those candidates might never think to apply for some of the companies that I've worked for. They might think that it's not a place for me. I don't think I could ever work there. I don't think they would want to hire people like me. So we do need to have access to maybe some candidate pools where, they might not have even thought that this was a choice for them. And especially if there's specific groups that we want to target, like, I hire a lot of technology cyber roles. We don't get a lot of females traditionally. We will have to connect with some organizations or do something outside of just who's applying, because typically when I look at the resumes of the applicants, they might all be male, and I'm not getting a female, so I can't even hire one because they're not applying. So if I don't connect with some of these external groups or attend some of these events, or connect with these organizations, I won't have access to some of these candidates, that may, and there may be some groups that can be really helpful to people. There's, groups of different abilities, candidates with autism or people who are disabled, where that organization or that group already has helped those candidates to vet them if they're able to work, or what accommodations they need, and they've helped, and they've already done a lot of the kind of legwork in terms of, can they be ready to go right away and work in an organization. So I think that it's really important to have those relationships and to partner with those organizations, because we can really use their help in terms of targeting specific groups. And then also, to Richard's point, I would agree in that I haven't seen a lot of stuff in terms of like what specific programs some of these, associations or things like that have put out. I haven't seen a lot of that outside of like just, specific organizations for certain groups that have that are doing all this work and trying to connect the businesses with these people, throwing career events and things like that. And there's a lot of stuff that's happening. I think if there's one of the positive things I could say that's come out of COVID, if there are, is that because we've gone virtual with a lot of events and career fairs and, you know, virtual conferences, that we have access to way more candidates than I would have in person. So I do think that, you know, there are a lot of ways that some of these groups can connect us to many more people than we would have maybe had in the past couple of years.
Very good. Those are some really good points, and I want to unpack more, but I know we still have quite a bit to cover. And in the interest of time, let me just jump into our fourth question. So, what are some of the current policies creating barriers for Black professionals in recruitment? Some that you may be aware of. And what are some of the solutions to these policies and barriers? It could be anything within recruitment. I think we touched on a few of them. Where, you know, I think Mahila, you brought up the good point where, you know, a client may tell you, okay, sorry, this is what we look like, this is what we're looking for, and so I'm curious to understand, how do you reconcile that? Because you're in the business of finding or fielding candidates to your clients, right?
Yep.
And if they come to you with specific needs, at the end of the day, you're in business to ensure that you can field candidates, right? And so it's almost a conflict there. As much as you can see that EDI lens from your perspective, your clients may not necessarily appreciate that or may not even understand it,
Yeah.
right? So how do you reconcile that? And I'd be curious to hear what you guys have done to reconcile that. Maybe I'll start with Mahila this time.
So I know that I've definitely challenged a few of my clients in this regard. And it comes down to just a level of rapport, right? Like rapport, but being bold as well. So calling people out, but in a way that doesn't make them feel, they're going to feel uncomfortable, but not judged. You know, sometimes with these biases, it just takes somebody holding up a mirror to make you realize, okay, maybe that is not the best requirement to have as a must-have for this job. You know, I can think of somebody that I worked with a few years ago, and it was a small company, and he was very specific about what he was looking for, and some of the requirements were based on, like, you know, gender and location. And it was, you know, just going back and forth and telling him, like, okay, so this is what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is present you with these candidates. And sometimes I'll remove names from the resume so they can't see, you know, like they can't be tipped off by the name, what this person might look like. And, you know, then setting up the interview. And sometimes they're surprised by who they connect with after an interview. So that's one kind of tactic that I've used in the past. And sometimes it ends well, and other times, you know, you're left empty-handed because they decide they're not going to work with you. They'll look elsewhere for candidates. But it's a balance. And I think the sales side of recruitment is what keeps me going, because I am passionate about selling the people that I represent, you know, selling their talent and their merit. So I know that that's gone far for my candidates, and I take great pride in knowing that I got them a foot in the door. Maybe they didn't get the job, but they got a foot in the door, and perhaps they've adjusted this hiring manager's perception of who they're looking for and why. And I think that's equally as important. Maybe not for this initial hire, but maybe the next hire, they're going to think twice before they say, maybe that's not a must-have, you know? So kind of stepping up with those small micro challenges, I want to say, they do make me feel a lot of pride in what I do.
Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for the courage in sharing that with your clients, especially when you tell them, okay, and doing in such a neat way as well. And you're conveying a message by trying to make sure they can identify some of their biases, right? And I think that's a very neat way of conveying that message in a way that's a win-win for you and the client. Richard, your thoughts?
I want to point out that, I mean, what Mahalia is saying, I mean, she's brave in the way that she's approaching that, and it should be noted that not everybody operates that way, and not all people of color that are in the recruitment space operate that way either. It really is a, you know, kill or be killed environment oftentimes, and there's probably a lot more conformity than there is rebellion when it comes to that. And, you know, experience gives you a little bit more of an ability to navigate through some of those challenges. And so, you know, the way that we are speaking, you know, is not necessarily the voice of those that might be maybe less experienced in the field of recruitment, who feel as though they have to make a placement in order to keep their job. And so there's a lot more compromising of their values and ethics by doing that. And then there are those that realize that if they give the client what they're looking for, then they're going to be rewarded. And so I would probably say the majority of people, from my experience in recruitment, fall more into that camp, that they're not looking to push against the tide. They are looking to give the client exactly what they think they're looking for. And that's the other aspect of it too, is sometimes we read, you know, sometimes recruiters will read into what the client is looking for. I've seen in many instances where a colleague will go into a particular business, maybe it's a small business, and they'll look around and they'll say, everybody here is a millennial and they're white. And so they return with an understanding or a spec to say, I need somebody that is a millennial and that they're white. And if they're not challenged in that assumption as to, well, where do you get that from? Well, that's what everybody looks like that's there, right? Not recognizing that may not necessarily be even what the client is looking for. So I just wanted to kind of, you know, bring up that point because, you know, I don't want there to be this idea that all Black people in recruitment have our approach. They're not, I would probably say that that's not necessarily the case. We have all, you know, Brandy, Mahalia, and myself have probably reached had to get over a certain point or hurdle within our careers and have to develop certain negotiation skills and the ability to develop rapport that has allowed us to be able to navigate through those a little bit more. And also maybe even take the hit a little bit more often, perhaps, than somebody who might be, you know, more impressionable or feeling that there's more risk in taking that approach. So I just wanted to you know, to underscore that point.
Thanks for sharing that. And I certainly appreciate it. And I can see that obviously you guys have learned how to navigate these little nuances, especially when it comes to recruitment. But the intention here is obviously the possibilities to actually, you know, perhaps showcase to whoever's getting into recruitment right now and maybe stuck in a decision where they have to really get that client for their, or rather get that candidate for their client. And they have to compromise by making, you know, going through some of these hurdles that you guys have gone through. And if they can get that message and how to address it or how to actually navigate those challenges, it'll be beneficial for, I think, all of us. I'd want to hear your thoughts as well, Brandy.
Yeah, I think that those are some very valid statements because I think that, I mean, even just coming to work every day for all of us is a challenge and courage requires, right? Especially in the spaces that we work in. So I would agree with Richard in the sense that, you know, over the years, I have worked with many people and they don't always all feel as strongly about DE&I or diversity and inclusion in recruiting or don't feel, or even if they do, may not want to actually put themselves out there for a candidate or push back when, you know, they're already told no. I mean, I've seen in so many cases, if, you know, if someone says, no, we're going to pass and it's okay, here's the next person, like, as opposed to maybe one of us will be like, well, wait, let's talk about why. Here's why I think this is a good candidate and here's how they impressed me. Let's talk about it, right? So it does take a lot of courage to take this stance, and it definitely isn't a lot of us that, you know, feel as strongly. But one thing I would say in terms of the policies, I think that I think can impact or impede some of what we're trying to do. One specific one that I could say is in terms of education, expecting to have a certain degree, expecting to have an MBA, expecting to have, you know, a certain school. Those to me are policies that can leave people, who marginalize people out. Not everybody has the situation where they can afford higher education. Not everybody's in a situation where, you know, they're able to go to certain schools. A lot of these schools that have quote unquote really great, you know, reputations or top schools are maybe outside of big cities, and you would have to live in residence. If you can't afford to live in residence, how are you going to go to, you know, some of these schools? So there's so many things. Or do you need to have 1 or 2 jobs to be able to afford to go to school? Maybe your parents couldn't afford to send you and you got to work it out yourselves, or maybe they just can't, they have more than, you know, a couple of children and they can't do it. So I think that, you know, the way that it is in Canada and North America, when it comes to higher education, it's all about money and it's all about access, and not everybody has that equally. And, you know, sure, of course, you know, they do say people can get OSAP or get student loans, but we all, you know, we've seen the stuff in the news about how damaging student loans can be for a person who's starting out there. So if you're a person of color, you're BIPOC, and you're out there and you borrowed all this money to go to school and university, but then you also experience difficulty getting a job because there's some unconscious biases that are preventing you from getting some of these jobs. All of these things affect, right? Like, how are you able to get educated, and then can you get a job, and then how are you going to pay off all these loans? So I think that when we are recruiting for specific roles, and, you know, especially companies that are in certain industries that think like, you know, the receptionist has to have an MBA. Like, I mean, some of the stuff is not necessary. You're passing up on some amazing candidates who are really bright and brilliant and maybe could have gotten top marks in university. But I think that we have to stop thinking in that sort of old school mentality that, you know, these are the top candidates because they went to these schools and got these grades. I think we do have to open it up. And I do see there's a big change and shift in technology, cyber related roles. I find those roles aren't as nitpicky with that kind of stuff. Whereas, you know, I think that everybody just kind of needs to get on board with that. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day what school you went to or what your grades were. You know, even if you maybe went to one of these schools, if you're working 2 and 3 jobs, how are you going to keep a 4.0 when you've got to keep these jobs in order to pay for your bills and pay for your school? So, you know, I just feel like a lot of that stuff, people need to think about it. It's not a level playing field, and that should not be a standard that we assess people's skills by. I think there should be a skill set or, you know, a case that you have to do or prove and show that you have the skills that are required of the job, maybe but through testing and stuff like that. But I don't think that it should be these particular schools and these particular grades that should be the main barometer anymore.
I've experienced that. I you know, many years ago, I worked for an organization, an excellent organization, in fact. But there was a tendency, and it reminded me on several occasions on some of the comments you made, Brandy, because they had a relationship with one particular university, and it's one of those universities that's kind of out of town. You know, the people that go there generally are coming from a particular kind of class environment. They live on campus, and it has generally or typically been more of a school that was populated with whites only. And I don't know if the company ever recognized that this is what was happening, that they were using this school to farm, entry-level roles into the company. And so everybody seemed to kind of have or follow a certain pattern. And there were obviously exceptions. I was one of those exceptions. But it was one of those things that was kind of a running joke amongst those that did not go to that particular university, because when anybody was announced as a new employee, they tended to come from this particular institution. So yeah, I think that's something that you mentioned that kind of resonated with me. And it's something that I think now, and people don't recognize that is what is referred to, maybe not understood, but it really is a systemic barrier, right? You've created a system within your company with which you use to recruit talent, and consciously, unconsciously, you've actually excluded a lot of potential candidates for your organization. But I think now maybe that that mirror is being put in front of many of these companies to be able to say, hey, why do we not have a diverse workforce? Oh, well, nobody applies to our company. Well, maybe it's because the people that you're asking to apply are coming from a very small subset of the population in certain quarters and certain, from certain institutions. So very, very important. And glad you mentioned that.
Thanks for sharing that, Richard. And I just wanted to maybe highlight one point, and this is something that I come across with most of our clients, is that perceived notion is everything. As much as we all understand what we're saying right now, it's some people may have a very hard time understanding that, and may not necessarily see that that as being systemic. And because their understanding is that, okay, everyone's got the freedom to choose whatever school they want to go and be admitted to whatever school they want to go, and that always seems to be the argument, and they cannot see further than that. They can't see past it, and you have to really take your time to make sure they understand that not everyone has access to these kind of funds to get into those institutions. No, we don't have equal access or equitable access to these kind of opportunities. By me taking a loan, just like to Brandy's point, I don't know what the opportunities are once I've graduated from school. I really don't, because I'm faced to navigate all these unconscious biases and just hope that someone's going to pick my profile and say, okay, we're going to hire Kevin for this role. And those are things that they tend to really struggle with. And we spend a lot of time trying to explain those perceived notions and trying to break those mentalities where, people just see things in black and white. It's, you have, the opportunity to apply for something. There's nothing barring you legally. And that's always the term. There's nothing that's, stopping you from applying for any institution legally, and you're free to do it. And they don't seem to really get that. And so I think it's very important that we take our time to really understand, or rather at least convey these messages in a way that, people can understand, especially on the other side of the aisle, that, we don't necessarily have these opportunities as you may assume we do, because they just don't exist. They may appear equitable on paper, but the reality is that they're not. And which ties into my last question here. So I know we're out of time. So what role, mind you, it's been a great conversation. What role does recruitment play in breaking barriers in both industry and community? And maybe, I guess I'll take this to Brandy, and then we'll go around again.
Sure. So I would say that recruitment plays a huge role to breaking barriers. And, I don't want to repeat some of the stuff that I've said already, but some of the things that my other two panelists have said, but for sure, someone in a position of being a recruiter in a company, it can make a difference in somebody's life. And that role that you play really can, obviously you may not be the decision maker, but what you do with your power in terms of influencing decisions, pushing back appropriately, challenging unconscious biases or decisions that you feel may be unfair, doing name scrubbing like Mahalia has done and some of us have done in certain roles. Some of these things that we do and all of these practices that we do, it helps in playing a role in making sure that, we do everything we can to make it an equitable practice and an equitable experience for the company. And also these targets that the businesses have now, a lot of them now have targets based on specifics. Like I've mentioned, okay, we need to hire more women in this sector, or, we don't have enough people of color in this group, and we need to improve that. So our role in recruitment can also affect the bottom line for these companies and help them to be more profitable, because we are now in a global workplace. Like the world is now a global workforce, and the candidates and the clients that we have come from all over the globe of different colors and backgrounds and everything. And our clients now are expecting us to reflect that. And if we are not showing up to an engagement with a client, with a diverse team, you have no idea what that client's team is going to look like. And if you come there with everybody on your team looking exactly the same and no diversity, you're going to show the client that, you know, you don't have that perception. You don't get it now. Like times have changed, and you have to get with it. You have to move and advance with the economy and with the world. And so if, our role actually can help position us with clients in a way that is a positive perception, and in a way that shows that we get it and that we are walking the walk and not just talking the talk. And it can actually help us to increase get business. I know sometimes there are some clients that will not work with certain groups if they're not seeing that reflected within the team, and they're not seeing that reflected within the organization. So I think that it's kind of cool that all of us on this panel, like, our jobs can make a big difference in people's lives, and also a big difference within the firms that we work with.
Thanks for sharing that. I consider recruitment to be the almost the entry, or rather the door to the pipeline. And I think we have a great opportunity right now to change some of these narratives that we've seen over the years. And I thank all of you for challenging some of those narratives that already exist in many workplaces in a way that is well seasoned. You know exactly what to do and how to navigate that, and perhaps even providing some solutions along the way, right? And I think if people don't challenge these clients as you're talking to your clients, then it's just going to end up perpetuating itself over and over again. And I'm glad that you guys are doing that. Mahalia, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think we're in a unique position to really affect change, and it's humbling, and we also have a responsibility. So I take that very seriously, and just remembering that who we're presenting and sticking to that commitment, that it's merit-based, right? Like, these people, I have a reason as to why I'm putting them forward to you. There's some merit in their work history, their experience. Let me tell you about who this person is, and having more of a conversation beyond the resume in terms of what this candidate can bring to the table. So getting to know the people that you represent is really, really important. So you can definitely put them forward in a way that they may not have been considered otherwise, So that is a huge advantage that I think when you're just going through an ATS system, you can't do that, right? Or blindly applying to something on Indeed, there's no way that you can do that. But to have a voice there for you that can speak up and tell your story as a professional beyond your resume, that's key to diversity and inclusion, and just representing everybody based on merit.
Thanks, Mahalia. Richard, your thoughts?
First, I want to say it's very refreshing and reassuring to hear Brandy say that there are clients out there that are actually insisting or having an expectation that there's going to be a diverse pool of candidates that's being presented. I've not yet experienced that, sadly. But I'm looking forward to having that as an expectation. Maybe there's an automatic assumption that I'm going to do that, and so they're not being expressive of that. But I think that's great if that's been if that's part of your experience. I'm hoping that that's the case going forward more and more. Building on what you said, Kevin, the role of a recruiter can be extremely powerful. We are, as you said, the gatekeepers, the people that essentially open the door to a small group of candidates for any particular job. In any particular role that we're working on, we're only going to be sending a very small sample, a short list, if you call it. And so who we decide to go on that short list, it matters, and it can, be can really make a difference in terms of people's lives. When we are working on management roles, even more critical, because if we are successful in giving people of color an opportunity and they get the job, then in all likelihood, they will also be influential in being able to do the same thing for somebody else. So, I don't take, and you can probably hear it from all of the panelists, we don't take our jobs lightly, the importance and the influence that we may have. And so, yeah, I think it's critical, and I think it's also great that some of us, and Mahalia will be one of them, that has kind of gone out independently to be able to open up her own firm and be able to be known as seeking out and advocating for equity inclusion and the type of people that she's looking to hire. I think that also is very important, that we also look at, or some of us look at, opportunities to be able to own our own businesses and be able to advocate for our community in that way as well, and be kind of a light or kind of a beacon that people can go to and say, okay, this organization is one that we can go to in order to source individuals, as opposed to maybe a larger, more generic company where you're not quite sure in terms of how they operate in terms of their kind of equity and inclusion approach to recruiting.
Thanks, Richard. And I will say there are quite a few organizations out there that are actually trying to find people they can build a relationship with, in terms of ensuring that they have a pipeline of candidates from historically marginalized communities. And I would say at least 99% of my clients are actually looking for that, and are looking to ensure they can, because one of these strategies that we take is we normally ask our clients to ensure that instead of being reactive and scrambling to provide equitable opportunities for all candidates out there, it is in their best interest to cultivate relationships within those communities that you intend on bringing in a pipeline of people, and as opposed to just reaching out to a recruiting firm and ask them to field you with a group or diverse group of candidates, be it from the Black community, from the Indigenous community, whatever the case is. We try and make sure that they can understand that the key here is making sure they can actually cultivate and build on relationships. And so a majority of them are actually looking for recruiting firms that are, one, largely owned by historically marginalized communities, and two, they're looking for recruiting firms that specialize in fielding candidates from historically marginalized communities as well. And so I think we have a great opportunity right now as it pertains to ensuring that we can present this great talent that's out there in front of these organizations, to ensure they can have a thriving environment and a more inclusive environment. And I think there's a great opportunity for that. And I thank Mahalia, and I'm glad to hear that she's actually doing that. I just want to take these to our closing thoughts, because I know we're a little over time, and it was, first of all, great having everyone's perspectives shared on this platform, and thoughts as well. It was great insights as well. And I'd want to just take this to our closing thoughts. Maybe I'll take it back to Richard, and we'll go around again.
You know what? I'm just going to close by saying that, I look forward to an opportunity where recruiters, like those that are being represented on the panel, will also start to network, create alliances, be able to share and be able to support each other. And oftentimes, it can be a very kind of independent and lonely community. And so I think that, like with all other areas of work, whether it's in accounting or IT or whatever, they are all kind of creating or starting to build on their alliances and in order to be able to provide support to each other. So, I think that there are increasingly more people of color in the recruiting space, still probably very, very much in the minority. So looking forward to continuing to build those relationships and alliances with those of us in our community, because I think that that's another area where we're able to bring strength and be able to kind of bring the candidates together as well, because they are also operating in environments where they're operating independent. So a recruiter of color has the ability to, again, be kind of a focal point of the community in being able to provide representation. So now that, you know, Mahalia is a focal point and Brandy's a focal point and myself, now when we're able to kind of, hopefully in the future, be able to come together, that will just have a multiplying effect in terms of our ability to exact change within our community.
Those are great words.
Yeah.
I can imagine there's incredible potential in our shared experience. And I'm just trying to picture, I can only imagine a recruiting firm run by the three of you. I'll be coming to you guys. Because I'm actually
Mahalia, you better think about that.
I'm really trying to make sure I can build as many partnerships, especially with recruiters and recruiting firms, because of the work that I do. And it will come a long way. And just listening to this exchange, there's great potential in our collective experience. And I think we ought to maximize on it. I'll take this to Mahalia, your thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank you, Kevin, for, you know, facilitating this opportunity for us to get together and have this conversation. I think if for nothing else, being able to articulate my experience over the years and it's accumulating to a point like this, it makes it all worth it, because there were many days where I wondered, what am I doing and who am I serving? And to be standing independently now and choosing, you know, who I work with and who I represent with a lot more freedom and really feeling like I have nothing to lose. It's very, very freeing. So I just want to thank you for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to, you know, getting to know everybody here. Yes, thank you, Brandy. And keeping the momentum going. You know, I think that's the key, keeping the momentum going. We're in a unique position just based on history and the times that we're living in. So let's not take it for granted and continue to march forth on March 4th.
Thanks for sharing that. And you're right. It's very important that we stay connected. And I think I met Brandy at an event last year at the Tech Be Future, I believe. And it was something similar. You know, we were there for I think it was the BPTN that had organized that event. It was great. Yeah. And I think that's where we met. And yeah, it's incredible opportunity, and no problem. I think this is a great platform to meet you know, professionals within your scope, where you can actually share experiences and perhaps even conduct business together. That's the whole goal about this. So Brandy, your thoughts?
Absolutely, I totally agree. I put in the chat for Mahalia and Richard my LinkedIn so that we can stay connected, because I think that, you know, like we all said, not everybody has, you know, kind of the same mindset. So when you do meet people who are like-minded, I think you definitely need to stay connected. And, you know, there's power in numbers, and we can always do a lot more connected and leverage each other's networks. So I think that's great.
Well, thanks again, and I really appreciate
thanks very much, Kevin.
us. And we'll I guess we'll end it there for today. And it was great having all of you on this panel today.
Yeah,
and
thanks, Kevin. It was great to meet you at the event. So good things came out of it.
Yeah, finally.
Thanks, Kevin.
All right, guys.
Great to meet all of you. I'll be in touch. I'll connect.
Sounds good.
Bye now, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye, Richard. Bye, Brandy.
Bye.
Bye.